Rosenberg, president and founder of the New Democrat Network and former Bill Clinton campaign advisor, and Larry O'Connor hosts Mornings on the Mall on WMAL and Washington Radio. He's also editor-at-large for hotair.com. Larry, was this earlier than we thought? Because Bret Baier, who of course anchors Special Report, recently interviewed Trump and says that he said he would release this just shortly before the convention.
Yeah.
But now we have this list. Why?
I don't know why, but I think it's a smart move. It certainly steals the media narrative for the next couple of days, which Trump is so good at. But it's also stealing it not because of some crazy statement at a rally. It's substantive, and it gives people something on the Republican side of the equation to discuss, debate, and possibly coalesce around. That's why most of us were figuring this sort of thing would come the week before the convention. Maybe he's saving that week before the convention for his vice presidential pick. But, you know, Judge Sykes' name really does stick out to me. As Shannon just explained, she is always constantly showing up on these lists over the last several chances for a Republican president to nominate. But specifically today, I think it's important because just yesterday, a D.C. federal judge, Richard Leon, struck down the District of Columbia's draconian laws against concealed carry permits here in the state. And Judge Sykes is very strong on the Second Amendment. She actually ruled against Chicago's ban on firing ranges. So she was able to loosen up the Second Amendment in Chicago, of all places. I think if this election in November comes down to the Second Amendment, you look at states like Colorado, Florida, and Virginia, and Ohio, where this election could be decided. I would love that debate. Donald Trump's pro-gun justice versus Hillary Clinton's draconian anti-self-defense justices.
Simon, why do you think that he would release it now? I mean, there's been some talk about a third-party candidate, somebody who's more conservative. I mean, could Trump be putting these names out now to try to deflate any more talk about that?
Look, clearly this period between, him wrapping up the nomination and the convention is really all about one thing, which is about making him look presidential and be taken seriously as a president, not seriously as a guy in the game, but somebody who could actually be president of the United States. And so I think this is another step in that way. We saw the coverage that he received last week when he came to Washington. It was almost Popian. It was like the Pope coming to town. And so I assume that we're going to continue to see things like, he's already announced his transition team head, right? The person running his vice presidential pick. They're trying to create this impression that this is a very serious campaign getting ready to become the president of the United States.
Right.
It's another step in that direction.
Well, it's really interesting because we're waiting today for this meeting with Henry Kissinger. That the Trump's so that was big news in and of itself, because foreign policy, of course, has been top of mind for many people, most people in America.
And Simon, I think this goes well beyond just looking presidential. It's also about unifying behind the candidate and behind ideas. Don't you wish the Democrats could be doing that right now, Simon?
Okay, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I want to deal Shannon back in here because she's the one who covers all the courts for us here at Fox. It's interesting, Shannon, because Merrick Garland actually has been put forth by President Obama to fill that seat. And of course, Republicans have said, look, we're calling stalemate on this because we think that we should wait until the next person is elected president. But I want to go back to some of these other names on the list, too. You mentioned Thomas Lee of Utah. His brother, wasn't Mike Lee also thought of, the senator, as somebody that might be named?
Yeah, his name has come up quite a bit, and he's somebody who clerked at the High Court for Justice Alito. He is a very well-respected, intellectually deep, and very much dyed-in-the-wool conservative. I mean, he's somebody that his name has come up a number of times for the Supreme Court. He's got a rich legacy, he and his family, in the judicial branch, and again, so now his brother sitting on the Supreme Court in Utah is now on the short list for Donald Trump. So not surprising there. But what's interesting is that so many of these federal judges, they often have clerkships at very high levels, and many of them with the Supreme Court. And there are several who have, as I mentioned earlier, clerked for people like Justice Thomas, Justice Rehnquist. If you're trying to satisfy conservatives that you're going to pick people who are serious and will hew to the conservative philosophy while they remain on the court, because we know a lot of folks come here and drift away from the right once they join the court, choosing people for your list who have clerked for Clarence Thomas and Rehnquist, you're going to impress conservatives with those kinds of picks.
All right, Shannon, thank you much for your expertise today. Let's move on just briefly to what we were kind of alluding to there with Simon and Larry, which was the Democratic disarray. I mean, Simon, I think that this is fascinating. Sanders wins Oregon, basically ties in Kentucky, and there's no earthly way that he could become the nominee because of superdelegates. But he could actually go to the convention with more pledged delegates. And he says that's exactly what he is going to do. He is not going away. So how does Hillary Clinton get past this? Because she's not only fighting Donald Trump now, but she still has to fight off Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, look, I think this is a major test for the party leadership and for Hillary Clinton to work this out. You know, if this doesn't get worked out and Bernie Sanders doesn't come on board and play ball, right, you know, there could be a split that would give Trump a serious shot at winning this thing. And I think that Hillary, you know, part of Hillary's whole story, right, is that she was Secretary of State. She can bring people together. She can work to get things done, find common ground, work to get things done. Well, her first opportunity to show that kind of presidential leadership, I think, is going to be what happens with Bernie Sanders over the next few weeks, because clearly he's a little angry, and I think that the party's going to have to work very hard to prevent this from going off the rails.
You're making it seem like Hillary Clinton could just call up Bernie Sanders and say, hey, stop it now. I mean, that's not going to happen. And by the way, the DNC, more and more now, there have been calls for Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign now because people believe that this whole thing was a setup by the establishment. And Larry, who would have thunk? Because that whole storyline was about the Republicans this year. And guess what? That race is pretty much finished now. And now we're still debating the chaos that could unfold at the Democratic convention.
It's unfolding before our eyes. Just look at Nevada last weekend and Debbie Wasserman Schultz's performance last night after the Kentucky primary. You know, I love this narrative on the left that Bernie Sanders needs to jump on board and conform to the front runner for the Democrats, but Donald Trump needs to jump on board and conform to those who didn't win the Republican nomination. It's an interesting little two sides of the same coin there. Here's the biggest problem with the Democrats right now. From the beginning, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Clinton team have set up this entire what should be a democratic process to pick their nominee. They've set the entire thing up as really a coronation, and the Sanders people hate it. And in response to that, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Clinton team are responding with strong-arm tactics that look like a putsch. I hate to say this, but Simon Rosenberg would be a better DNC chairperson right now than Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and I've just doomed your chances, Simon. Sorry about that.
Larry.
Well, guess what? She has a challenger in her own race, in Florida. So
a serious challenge.
A serious challenger. So I think he's going to be on this show actually tomorrow. So stay tuned for that.
I will tune into that.
And Larry, thanks much.
Thanks, Gretchen.